Hello. We're working now from the book The Lord by Romano Guardini. I'm Gus Silke from St. Babel, and I'm the Director of Faith Formation at St. Babel. And this is chapter 12 of the book The Lord by Romano Guardini, the section on the Beatitudes. Guardini helps us see the deep meaning of the Beatitudes of the Lord. He lines up an account that's pretty remarkable, I think. And I want to look at it in some detail. It seems to me that on page 80 of our edition of The Lord by Guardini, we have the beginning of his commentary on the Beatitudes, and I want to just look at that to begin with, because I think that will give us a way in to understanding his account. He says, "Praise for the meek, those who have become quiet within, humble and kind. Theirs an attitude of genuine selflessness, of clarity and quiet before God. Such as these will inherit the earth. In the order of things to come, they will be masters, ruling not with weakness, but with that strength become mild, which is capable of ruling straight from the center of truth." So, his description of meekness is deep, and it needs to be kind of unpacked, I think. So, notice the first point, they're quiet within. So we have the same idea we've seen before in Guardini, that the silent forces are the strong ones. And then beyond the quiet within, the choice to be humble and kind, selfless, and then also to have a spirit of clarity and quiet before God. There again, the emphasis on stillness or silence before God. In the order of things to come, the meek are going to be masters, but they don't rule with weakness. I used to say when I taught the virtue of meekness that meek does not mean weak. And Guardini says the same thing, ruling not with weakness, but with the strength which has become mild, which is capable of ruling straight from the center of truth. So it's a tall order to be able to rule in a mild way straight from the center of truth. I mean, the truth makes you free here. And that really hits home too to the reading in the Gospel of John, where Jesus promises in the Last Supper discourse to give us the Spirit of truth that the world won't receive. The meek inherit the earth because they inherit the capacity to rule straight from the center of truth. Then the merciful are praised because they will find mercy with God. Love of neighbor and love of God belong together. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart, and thy neighbor as thyself. By that same token, he connects that with forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. The love, listen to this, the love Christ means is a live current that comes from God, is transmitted from person to person, and returns to God. It runs a sacred cycle, reaching from God to an individual, from the individual to his neighbor, and back through faith to God. He who breaks the circuit at any point breaks the flow of love. He who transmits purely, however, purely however small a part of that love, helps establish the circuit for the whole. So we're meant to enter into the circle of love, the love that comes from God and goes back to God. And if we flow in that flow of love, we're completing the circuit. And notice the circuit runs a cycle, sacred cycle, from God to an individual, from the individual to his neighbor, and back to God. So Guardini here is giving an account of love that's like an electric circuit. And he says, if you break the circuit at any point, that breaks the flow of love. If you transmit purely, even if it's a little bit of love, like a little way of love, that helps establish the circuit for the whole. Then he talks about blessed are the pure of heart, or the clean of heart, for they will see God. Now, here's something very important in Guardini. Purity of heart here means not only freedom from confusion through the senses, which is the way you would normally think about it, like it's with the heart that one sees right, but it's more than that. It's a general inner clarity and sincerity of intent before God. Those who possess it see God, for he is recognized not by the bare intellect, but by the inner vision. So if you want to see God, you've got to have coherent inner vision. Okay? And the eye is clear, he says, when the heart is clear. For the roots of the eye are in the heart. It is with the heart that you can see properly. To perceive God, then, we must purify the heart. It helps little to tax the intellect. So you have this, once again, this experience that we've all been having reading Guardini, where we're taxing our intellect to understand him. But we come across a part of the book like this that reminds us that it's with love from our heart that's being purified, that's going to see God correctly, not just the intellect. However, he commands the effort of the intellect at the same time. So maybe we have to put these two things together and see, as John Donne talks about, where insight occurs when the reasons of the heart become known to the mind. I like that. That's the integrative step. And Guardini's pointing at that too. Because if you just go off on your speculative intellect, just looking at things, and you don't have the heart engaged to love God, both loving God directly through your heart and loving God through the things that you're looking at with your intellect, it stalls out. I mean, just what he said. The intellect starts to run and it gets taxed. It gets overused. I think too of the book Leisure, the Basis of Culture by Joseph Pieper, where he talks about two aspects of the intellect. Okay? One is the ratio. That's the hard-working rationality of the intellect, putting logic together, and really that's the part of the intellect that can really tax us, because we're trying to line everything up and see properly what's going on and make logical connections. And then there's the intellectus, he calls it, the ratio and the intellectus. Well, the intellectus, according to Pieper, is that simple vision of the intellect that kind of cuts through and sees things whole and sees things all in a singular moment. And it's this relationship between the two that make up the journey of a person. You can't just use the rational part of your intellect, according to Pieper. You've got to be able to look at things whole with the simple vision, the serene vision. And it seems to me that, that you bring those two things together in a properly functioning intellect. And so otherwise, if all intellectual work is limited to just the rational side, we find ourselves corrupting the vision, the overall vision of our intellect. Because the intellectus, the ability to see things whole, to see the world, as Blake says, in a grain of sand, or all heaven in a wildflower, if we can't have those moments of vision, then we just end up rationating, and we don't see the whole. We have to be able to rest our intellect in simple vision. I know that's a difficult concept, but I think that that's what Guardini's getting at too when he uses this different code. When he says, the eye is clear when the heart is clear, for the roots of the eye are in the heart. I mean, it's a different way of saying the same thing. To perceive God, then, we must purify the heart. We must teach our heart to rest in God, even when our intellect is struggling to understand something, and it's taxing itself to do that. And then finally he says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be recognized as sons of God. God is God of peace, because he is a God of strength and goodness. Okay? And it's as difficult to establish genuine peace as it is easy to inflame conflict. Is that not true? Notice what Guardini says here about conflict. Conflict brings with it all the narrowness, contrariness of earthly existence. Have you ever noticed that? When there's conflict between people, one of the things that happens is they become very narrow in their vision. They become very contrary to one another. You ever try to counsel married couples who are headed toward divorce? That's what happens. They become narrow and they become contrary. And Guardini goes on, in order to establish peace, intrinsic peace, okay, peace on the inside, right? One must have deep, all-resolving, all-overcoming strength. Those who can build such peace are truly of God. Now that is really a challenge. And notice that the peace he's talking about is a peace, I mean, you've heard that expression, they use it in foreign policy, like peace through strength. Well, right. But the real strength, according to Guardini here, is not external strength or strength of arms or strength of intellect. It's that deep, all-resolving, all-overcoming strength that could only come by the Spirit of God. Not by might, not by power, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. And I think that's what he's getting at. When you're truly open to the Holy Spirit giving you that deep strength, that's where the peace can come from. Now, and he picks up right here this question of how Jesus sided with the weak. Because the first thing people say, that because Jesus sided with the weak, Jesus was fundamentally weak. And Guardini takes that on head on and disagrees with it. He reminds us that that is not a good reading of Jesus. He says, the best reply to such assumptions is the question: is a man's strength to be measured solely by his insistence on getting his own way? In other words, the measure people have of strength is one of attachment to getting one's own way. Like autonomy, like Frank Sinatra singing that famous song, I did it my way. Or you've heard that expression, my way or the highway, right? You know, you either do it my way or get walking, right? Guardini suggests that that's not a good measure of strength. He goes on, if not that, by his brains, by his fists. So, it could either be he calculates and plots with his autonomy, trying to get his own way, using his brains, or he uses his fists, meaning he uses his means of power. Fists could be literally using his fist, or it could be like using his material resources. Like a friend of mine in business told me, you know, Gus, you got to know the golden rule. You know what that is? And I said, no, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And the businessman said to me, no, it's not, Gus. It's not that. The golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules. Okay? So he was arguing what Thrasymachus was arguing in the dialogues of Plato, right? The businessman was, to me, when he said, he who has the gold makes the rules. He was arguing what Thrasymachus says in the dialogue of Plato, that truth is the opinion of the powerful. And of course, that's shot through in our society right now. The truth is in the hands of those who seek to control the medium of social communication, or those who have the gold, the money, the power. But that's not the measure of truth that Guardini's talking about here. Obviously, he says there's a higher kind of strength. One, however, which renders all others questionable. In other words, the strength of the Spirit of God renders these other forms of strength, gold, power, intellect, wealth, the higher form of strength is found in the Spirit of God pouring itself out, self-giving. So the self-emptying of God is stronger than human strength. It's wiser than human wisdom. Listen again to what St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians when he says the foolishness of the cross is wiser than human wisdom. What does he mean? Christ, the power and wisdom of God, when he is weak on the cross, he is stronger than human strength. So, St. Paul makes the argument even stronger when he says the Jews look for miracles and the Greeks look for wisdom. But here we are preaching a crucified Christ who is the power and wisdom of God. That is to say, the miracle of the cross is a stronger miracle than the signs that St. Paul suggests the Jews look for. And the wisdom of the cross, which looks foolish to the world, is stronger than the wisdom of the Greeks. So even stronger than the dialogue of Plato is the cross of Christ. Even though, as we see, the dialogue of Plato hints, it points toward the cross of Christ if you read it right. And so too the miracles that the Jewish people look for point to the great miracle of the resurrection. But you see, there's earthly power, like my friend who told me that he who has the gold makes the rules. And then there's Christ's power that reveals itself in the true golden rule to treat others the way you want to be treated. And of course, a lot of human life is kind of the mixed empathy of that struggle between those two views. Okay? And Guardini helps us with that. He challenges us to question ourselves with the wisdom of the Beatitudes. Notice that. Okay? it's the case, Guardini tells us, that you have to open your heart, he says, to participate in this new order, the order of Jesus, bringing this divine reality to earth. Man must open his heart. He must free himself from the clutches of natural existence and advance to meet the things to come. He must eradicate the old, deeply rooted claim that this world is sufficient unto itself, the essential and only reality. He must admit that earthly existence, even at its best, is stained and discredited in the eyes of God. Naturally, that self-emancipation is particularly difficult for those for whom the world holds the most delights, for the powerful and creative, for all those who have a large share in the earth's greatness and beauty. These are the rich, the sated, the laughing, the praised, the honored ones. Hence, the woe that threatens them. On the other hand, blessings on the poor, the mournful, the hungry, and the persecuted. Not because their condition is itself blessed, but because it helps them to realize that more than just this world exists. Need teaches them only too well how inadequate existence is. And once taught, they turn more easily from earth to heaven for something better. Now, here's the kicker. Of course, the reaction is not guaranteed. Nothing on earth ever of itself guarantees heaven. Poverty can make men greedier than wealth. For example, hunger can harden. Pain can drive to despair. Contempt can inwardly destroy. Then they too are woes. But on the whole, Guardini says, Jesus' "blessed are you" is correct. He spoke from experience. It was the poor, the suffering, the despised publicans, sinners, and harlots who at least attempted to believe. The powerful, the learned, the wealthy, the secure were provoked by his message, or laughed at him, or hated him, because they considered him a danger to the political existence of the nation. In fact, Guardini reminds us, listen to this. This is important. In all Jesus says and does, there stalks a disturbing, antagonizing demand for a general reevaluation. And we're not comfortable with that, right? Because healthy common sense says that wealth is a blessing. Blessing. The fullness of possessions, blessing, happiness, and pleasure and fame. Our natural reaction to the Sermon on the Mount, Guardini says, is one of distaste. We don't like it, right? And it's much better to face, what Guardini reminds us, it's much better to face that distaste openly and try to overcome it than it is to unthinkingly accept Jesus' words as pious platitudes. That's very important, because as pious platitudes, Guardini says, that's the last thing they are. They come from heaven, but they shake palpably the foundations of earth. So, and then Guardini goes on to remind us that that there's different ways to misinterpret the Sermon on the Mount. And then he says to us here, we don't want to misinterpret. We don't want to betray Christ's wonderful words from the mountainside. And in order to not betray it, we have to keep our eyes clear for the great and beautiful things of life, yet at the same time understand that even the best earth has to offer, as he said before, is paltry and stained and lost by comparison, which to that which comes from heaven. So there's this breakthrough occurring from heaven. Celestial grandeur, says Guardini, breaking through. It's not just a formula, a mere formula for a new ethic, a superior ethic, but rather this is tidings of sacred and supreme realities entry into the world. Okay? So we're not just talking about a new ethic. There is a new ethic, but the ethic really leans on this whole reality shifting. The Holy Spirit coming down and giving us new truth. Okay? So, and when it's so new, it is so incomparable to anything that had ever been, Jesus can express it only by turning all comprehensible values inside out. When a human being in the grip of divine power attempts to convey something of God's holy otherness, he tries one earthly simile after another, trying to to give an account, one a way of talking, simile. In the end, he discards them all as inadequate and says apparently wild and senseless things meant to startle the heart into feeling what lies beyond the reaches of the brain. Something of the kind takes place here, and Guardini quotes this: "Eye has not seen, nor ear heard, nor has it entered into the heart of man what things God has prepared for those who love him. They can be brought closer only by the overthrow of everything naturally comprehensible. Then you're flung into a world of new logic. You're forced to make a genuine effort to understand." So much of the Sermon on the Mount is a wake-up call, and it stretches rhetoric in order to wake us up. After the Beatitudes, which dart, like he says, like great jets of flame from the heat and power of the love that awaits us, there follows a row of instructions as to how, now that we've heard, we're to conduct our lives. "But I say to you," this is a direct quote from the Sermon on the Mount, "love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who calumniate you." Do we read this correctly? Guardini asked. It is enmity Jesus is discussing. Now what that is only he who has had a real enemy knows. He whose heart has burned with insult. Okay? Because that's what enemies do. They insult you deeply. Or someone, like a person comes along and steals a bunch of your money, which has actually happened to me. How do you feel about that? When you expected that person who was your brother in the Lord, and you're never able to recover from the loss of all that he took from you. What do? And now, and now that enemy is not only to be forgiven, which I know that's true, because I've heard the call of Jesus to forgive the person who did that to me, but I have to love him too. Okay? No misunderstanding is possible. If you love those who love you, what merit have you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what merit have you? And he goes on, if you save your greetings just for your brothers, but not greet the person who hurt your business, what good are you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive in return, what merit have you? For even sinners lend to sinners that they may get back as much. But love your enemies and do good and lend, and not hoping for any return, and your reward shall be great. And you'll be called children of the Most High. For he's kind toward the ungrateful and evil. Be merciful, Therefore, as your Father is merciful. That's Guardini quoting the Sermon on the Mount. This is what he says. This is now his commentary. This is no longer mere justice or even goodness. It's no longer the voice of earthly reason that speaks. Something entirely different is demanded. The positive, heroic act of a bounty that can be acquired only from above, only from God, right? A divine generosity that is its own measure. And again, and to him who strikes thee on one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away the cloak, don't withhold the tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of thee, and from him who takes away thy goods, ask no return. And even as you wish men to do to you, so also you do to them. There's the golden rule right there. This most certainly, Guardini qualifies, does not mean that one must behave like a weakling or surrender oneself to force. Okay? Which of course I've been accused of in my choice to love those who have wronged me. But rather that men should extricate himself from the whole earthly business of defense and aggression. Why? Of blow and counterblow, of right and usurpation. He should emerge from the hue and cry of terrestrial forces, earthly forces, I can translate that, and affiliations to share in the freedom that God alone has to give. In other words, are you really free of the desire to take revenge? Then you're really free. The gist of the message lies in the words, and you shall be children of the Most High, for he is kind toward the ungrateful and the wicked. You gotta, and guess what? Now we begin to see, he says, what Jesus is driving at. A bearing in our own relationship to others that is no less than divinely free. Not what law and order demand, give me my money back, but what true liberty gives. The measure of that liberty is love. The love of God. When in the discussion group, we were reading this section, and I said, notice the difference in the definition of liberty between Guardini and Patrick Henry. For Patrick Henry, liberty is an establishment of rights. When he said at the Virginia House of Burgesses, give me liberty or give me death, right? He was arguing for a political liberty of law and order, okay? And although that can be of some use, certainly, in establishing a constitution, a government, although Patrick Henry wouldn't go to the Constitutional Convention, and that's a whole nother story. But the issue being that give me liberty or give me death is the kind of like, I want my freedom, my autonomy, my rights, okay? I want my money back, okay? But the measure of liberty for Guardini is love, the love of God, the superabundant love of God. And something of the superabundance of the mood is poured into the words, be merciful therefore, even as your Father is merciful. Give, and it shall be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall they pour into your lap. For what measure you measure, it shall be measured to you. To this we can only reply, but how can we possibly behave like God? That's the question. Guardini raises it, and he says, and the question, which is really an observation, is sound. That's a good question. What do you mean? We have to be like God? That's ridiculous. I want my money back. And I do. I still want my money back. I mean, after all these years. But Christ does not stand by a noble taskmaster urging us to climb by ourselves heights far beyond our strength. What he desires for us is the supernatural life of the children of God. As long as we think from the worldly standpoint, this is of course out of our reach. As long as I just keep demanding my money back, it's out of my reach. But Christ says, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. He shows us that God not only demands this of us, but that he gives us his own understanding, his own strength, thus enabling us to accomplish his demands. We must accept this on faith. Okay? Faith is the only thing that we got left, even when the money runs out. Okay? You would think I'm a little overly preoccupied with money these days, and maybe I am. But the issue is, even when there's no money, and you're out of money, and you're out of intellectual ideas, my friend from Africa, the priest, Father Okumo, who helped me start the Bosco Project, what he says is, when you're out of money, and you're out of ideas, but we're not out of Jesus, we're not out of Christ. And that is faith. When we're out of money and we're out of ideas, but we're not left alone by Christ to just work this out on our own. He comes right alongside us. He doesn't stand by, as Guardini says, he doesn't stand by looking at us with his finger, a noble taskmaster. Get this done. No. What he does instead is give us supernatural life of the children of God. And he says, with God all things are possible. God not only demands this of us, but that he gives us his own understanding, his own strength, thus enabling us to accomplish his demands. And we accept that on faith. When the mind cries, but this is impossible, faith replies, it is possible. Our faith is the victory that overcomes the world. Now, and then you're just sitting there, well, I just have faith in my failures, right? Because that's all I got left. And Guardini's last paragraph in this chapter answers that too. It says, every day will close with the realization that we have failed. And that's absolutely true. In fact, I've shared some of my failures here today with you. And still, we dare not ignore the command. Ruefully, we must place our failure at the feet of our Maker and begin again in the indomitable faith that we will succeed, because God himself gives us both the necessary will and the appointed way, even when we no longer have any money or any ideas. Because that's our faith. That's our victory over the world. I hope I've helped you understand this section of Guardini, the book, The Lord, chapter 12, on the Beatitudes. Thank you very much.